Contact, Ludwig Sardarian. We're going to get today's lecture started. We want to leave plenty of time at the end for some discussion. And thank you all for joining. I think we have like 34, 35 folks online and a lot of folks coming into the room and grabbing food as well. So welcome. This will be our third lecture in our lecture series. This will be an annual lecture series every month. We will actually announce future lectures at the end of this. We're going to make some schedule changes due to summer break. So today's presenters are myself, Ryan Kulkarni, and Chris Wood, the trifecta of wellness, as we call ourselves. And let's see. Just to bring up the lecture series objectives to always remind us of what our goals are. The goal is to have an education on what well-being is and how it impacts you professionally and personally. Implementation of actions to improve your well-being. Without the actions, we're just kind of sitting around and pontificating. And building self, and most importantly, meta-awareness to gauge progress and pivot points. And again, where's my guy Octavius? So this is being in the Jedi Knight Academy to learn how to become a Jedi Knight, understanding wellness. And then there's sustainability and maintaining inner peace, and that's when you kind of become a Jedi. And then you have to impart on others, and then you're the Yoda teaching other folks, consistently learning from that teaching process. So again, just to bring back a little bit about the 8 foundations and pillars of wellness, because our lecture series is really built on the back of these pillars. You have physical, which we presented previously. Today we'll be presenting emotional, intellectual, and spiritual. In the future lectures, we'll be touching about social, financial, environmental, and work life. And eventually what we'll do is wrap this all into life. And we'll start to pontificate and really have fun and go down rabbit holes on. Actually, one of my favorite concepts is what is consciousness and what is being alive and awake and why we're unique and the spirituality components of that. So that'll be a future lecture as well. So again, we're going to be focusing on these 3. We felt they were all tied together, so we wanted to talk to them together. So we do want to start with this video, which is very, very powerful and kind of speaks to, regardless of what walk of life you're in, how much we all live in our own worlds, our own crises, our own pain, our own mental challenges. And today's emotional, intellectual, and well-being series really touches upon this. But this is pretty impactful. It's a 5-minute video.
Come on. This is Janet. Hello? Oh, sorry. You should be.
So that was particularly touching for me. It's the program I continue to keep in touch with. Did my wellness training at Stanford, and it's pretty poignant. And I know I related to a lot of the personalities in there, and yeah, it was pretty emotional the first time I watched it. I think every time I watch it again, there's a lot of components that are critical. We'll have time to discuss this afterwards. So my component is intellectual well-being, and I'll define what that is, but it's really focused on enhancing resilience and performance through lifelong learning. I don't have to tell anyone in this room, we've all joined the healthcare process because we love learning, but there's an art of learning to continue learning. And so always keep learning. This is an intentional goal. And lifelong learning reduces burnout and boosts job satisfaction. Kind of what we're doing here in this lecture series is learning from each other. I know I learned from these two colleagues here, and I love it. We get so energized reviewing each other's slides because I'm like, oh my God, I never thought of it that way. I didn't think of it that way. And I take it home and I apply it to my life. And so it's the active pursuit of mental stimulation through learning, creativity, and critical thinking. Mental stimulation. It's not about repeating the same things over and over again. And intellectual well-being fuels your professional growth, and more importantly, your personal resilience. Those things are linked at the hip. I always tell folks, if you see someone at work, someone you've worked with before that's having issues at work, immediately dive into what's going on at home. That's why the work is being affected. It's always the personal side. This is my favorite side. We say there's a mental health epidemic in this country, in this world. We have a mental fitness epidemic. We are not training our brains to meet the stress and the overall workload that we have to face. So it's not a mental health. Now, there are folks that have mental health challenges, but it's a mental fitness. We don't train our minds to be ready. And so what is intellectual well-being? It's engaging the mind through curiosity. I'm going to use this word over and over again. Curiosity, learning, and problem solving. All right? Kind of sounds like our professional lives, but it's personal as well. Key components are, again, lifelong learning. You find those folks that live into their 90s and they're 100 years old, they're not sitting around. They're constantly engaged doing something. They're activating their brain all the time. The critical thinking, again, creativity and curiosity. We can learn from children quite a bit. And why is it relevant to what we do in healthcare? It sharpens clinical decision-making, adaptability to high-pressure environments, and contributes to lower rates of burnout. And my favorite word is bore-out, right? We seem to live in the two extremes in healthcare where we've got so much to do, and then we've got this period where we're so used to being jacked up doing a lot that we're suddenly bored, and then there's the bore-out. And so you have to be aware that there's those two extremes. And so why it matters to us in intellectual well-being, why it matters to us as in healthcare. Again, it increases our expertise in treating patients and taking care of folks. This continuous learning keeps us up to date, reduces burnout, as I mentioned, but it fosters a sense of purpose and growth. Where's my buddy Mike? Was he in here, Mike McLean? There he is. We just at LRT had a wonderful Accelerate 2020 kickoff, and it was very much about personal growth, personal mission, identifying what your personality type is and what your leadership style is, and it was wonderful. And improve patient care. This has been empirically observed, right? But I'll mention how this really has not been studied a lot in healthcare. Ironically, intellectual well-being and the performance improvement related to it, there's a lot of studies in sports, in IT, in the arts, in the hospitality industry. Zilch in healthcare. It's almost like we know too much. We're already all intellectual. We study enough, but there really aren't not a lot of studies behind it, which was shocking to me when I started to do the research. And so again, curiosity is critical to intellectual well-being. Learning, passion, and creativity. And I want you to continuously remember those words: creativity, passion, and curiosity. So today's entire lecture could probably be renamed neuroplasticity lecture, because this for me, as a young person trying to decide what I was going to do in my career, when I learned about neuroplasticity, I said, I want to study that, because that's the most amazing thing to me, is that the brain can continuously regenerate, recreate. You can change yourself. It's not just in children. And so the brain's ability to adapt and form new connections through learning. Now we've actually, I'll show you a video. We see it. And I'll show you another amazing video in a second to demonstrate that. And this is a saying I say all the time at home when my kids are kind of doing something, and I tell them, I said, if you intentionally change your behavior, the neurons that fire together wire together. You can change. You can significantly change who you are and how you think and how you perform. And so this video is actually demonstrating that that neuron on the right is a damaged neuron. And if you look, this other neuron next to it is actually going to make a dendritic connection to it, and it's going to take over the entire processes of that neuron. This is one of the first videos of this actually happening. It's remarkable. So to tell you, like, stroke patients that do better and any type of mental health issue, there is an ability to regenerate. So humans can change at any age, not just about children at a young age. I remember my dad saying, "Oh, if you don't learn another language by the age of 12," someone told me that you can never learn. It's bogus. You can learn any age. You can change at any age. It's proven in neuroscience. And this I found like 2 weeks ago, the work of Dr. David Sinclair. I sent to, we text a lot on the weekends too. So let me make sure the volume works here. Yeah. So again, there's a lot of stem cell research. There's a lot of stuff coming to age now where there is anti-aging. The brain is regenerating, and it's a phenomenal area of study right now. So neuroplasticity, if you look at the left side there, that image, it's all about neurogenesis, new synapses, strengthening the good synapses that you have, and then weakening maybe synapses that you don't want to utilize. And the rest of it is kind of the workflow, if you will, of how this all takes place. It's really fascinating if you actually get down into the neuroscience of how these nerves. I was a neuroscience major in college. I almost went into doing neuroscience as a PhD, but did not. It's really fascinating because it's artistic. It makes sense. It has its own little architectural design, and it's very intentional. You can really guide it in a positive direction. And so this is another remarkable video. When I was a kid, I remember reading about Dr. Ben Carson at Hopkins, all politics aside. I was, I think in high school or middle school, I got a chance to see him lecture, and I heard about these surgeries he had done where he took out an entire hemisphere of a child's brain. Just take out the right side because they had seizure disorder. And let me skip this for a second. So mind you, at age 6, an entire right brain was taken out. I mean, it's mind blowing. I mean, it was unheard of before that, and it's really remarkable that the brain can really be that plastic. For anyone that knows neuroanatomy, to take out an entire hemisphere, you would say, well, that's a non-functional human output. There's no way. Much less take out the right side. So you can see this child is going off to college. So, and he's done many of these surgeries before, and there's other ones that have been done around the world now. But again, this speaks to the neuroplasticity, the ability to learn new ways for the brain to connect. So I want to talk, when we talk about learning, I want to talk about achieving the impossible. This is a book I highly recommend by Stephen Kotler. It's one of my favorite books. When you see impossible things like we just watched becoming possible, you're seeing an intellectual quartet at work: motivation, learning, creativity, and the flow state. I want to talk a little bit about intrinsic versus extrinsic because we're talking about intellectual well-being here and learning and being motivated to continue learning. Once Maslow's hierarchy of food and safety and not being mauled by a lion, all that goes away, the extrinsic stuff doesn't matter anymore. Your salary doesn't matter. You can order anything on Amazon now. It doesn't matter. You can get food anywhere. What matters is how you internally feel. What are your intrinsic motivators? What makes you have passion? Why did you come to work? Why did you have kids? And so he talks about the full intrinsic stack. And high performers, highly successful, highly driven people have this full stack. Again, it's curiosity, passion, purpose, autonomy, and mastery. And it fuels long-term motivation. And again, this is all through learning. That's why I'm tying it into intellectual well-being. He talks about finding your MTP, your massively transformative purpose. This is to learning. I love an MTP. You got to have one. And it's deeply personal and intellectual mission that aligns with your core values and drives sustained effort. This is well studied. This book is outstanding. And so when you do that, when we're all learning new things that we love about, it could be art, it could be cooking, it could be this, could be that, you get into this flow state. We were talking about this at the LRT meeting. And flow is the optimal state of consciousness where performance is peaked. And it's the engine of the full stack. When you're learning new things and you're excited about it, there's this high people can get. And Kotler identifies the triggers as clear goals, immediate feedback, and challenge skill balance. You don't want to go crazy, right? You don't want somebody saying, I'm going to learn German, Mandarin, and Tai Chi at the same time, but you want to be balanced. However, habits and environments should be designed to maximize flow. You know, a lot of people see me running around doing crazy things at all different levels. It's because I want to remain in flow at all times, and they all converge eventually to a similar goal. And so the learning layer, back to intellectual well-being, is to develop a growth mindset and embrace challenges and learn from failure, right? This is a very strong, optimistic growth mindset approach. Stresses learning to learn, all right? We've got professionals in here that are lifelong learners, but learning to learn something new through techniques like deliberate practice, spaced repetition, skill stacking, and mastering the foundational skills before advancing. Continuous learning fuels adaptability and competence, okay? So intellectual well-being is having passion, curiosity, and that joy of continuing to learn, all right? I think I'm gonna hand it off to my buddy, Ryan, to do the emotional well-being section.
Thank you. All right, thank you, Dr. Sardarian. Good afternoon, everybody. So, and thank you, Dr. Sardarian. That was awesome. Really interesting. So I'm going to be talking about emotional wellness, which is the second part of our session today. So let's start off by defining what emotional wellness is. This is the ability to manage emotions, to cope with stress, and build satisfying relationships. It allows us to have a sense of meaning and a sense of purpose. It is strongly linked with all the other foundations. If you came to our first lecture, you might remember that when we talked about this wheel that Dr. Swarbrick developed in the 1990s, all of these individual foundations, they're all linked. And if one of them is affected, just like a drop in a still pool of water, all of them will get affected. So it truly is the key to good mental health, to good physical health, to good relationships, to better decision-making, clearer thinking, increased self-esteem, enhanced productivity, and improved resilience. And that's one of the key things we're going to be talking about is how to develop resilience through this entire lecture series and afterwards. So when you're talking about emotional health, there are two things that you have to be aware of. The physical brain and the more abstract concept of the mind. Because when you're optimizing emotional wellness, you are focusing on optimizing your brain health and optimizing the health of your mind. So the brain we can consider as the hardware. Okay, this is the physical organ. This is an organ made of neurons and blood vessels. It's processing information, regulating body functions, producing neurotransmitters, which are basically influencing your mood and your emotions. The mind is a much more abstract concept here. So if the brain is the hardware, the mind is your software. This is where you're having your subjective experiences of your consciousness, of your thoughts, emotions, and flow as we interpret them. It's interpreting and assigning meaning to all of your sensory input. It's influencing your thoughts, it's influencing your behaviors, it's influencing your well-being. So therefore, your mind is truly shaping your worldview. It's interpreting your situations, right? So therefore, just like you've heard the expression, you are what you eat. In this case, you are what you think. Okay? And so your mind can help you heal, or it can make you hurt. So let's talk about the healthcare worker and emotional wellness for this individual. I think we've all seen these challenges: high patient acuity, long hours, shift work, lack of support, high emotional investment, administrative burden, low autonomy, exposure to trauma and death, the fear of making a mistake. And then, of course, what are the consequences? Burnout, emotional, physical exhaustion, reduced empathy, poor concentration, medical errors, productivity, and financial cost to the systems that are involved. Can anybody think of one word that leads to, sir, Chris, we're working, to these challenges and leads to these consequences? What are we all experiencing? Stress. Stress, stress, stress. So in order to really understand emotional wellness and develop emotional wellness, we really need to understand stress. So let's define it. So stress is the mind's emotional and the body's physiologic response to any kind of demand, whether it's real or perceived. And that's critical to really understand this. Okay, the stress response is triggered. It's involving the HPA axis and sympathetic nervous system, which we're going to talk about here in a second. It can be acute. Stress can be chronic. Stress can be episodic. What are the types of stress? You can have work-related stress, stress at work, on the job, financial stress. You look at your bank accounts, relationship stress, or having an argument with a partner, health-related stress, going to the doctor's office and wondering what the lab tests are going to show, life changes, retirement, having children, environmental stresses, just basically worrying about the world and pollution and all that other stuff. So when you look at these types of stresses, does anybody notice something interesting between that and the wellness foundations? Right? You've got very, very similar. So when there's a wellness foundation, there's a type of stress associated with it as well. So it's always very important to be aware of that when you want to optimize to get to well-being, you want to optimize each of these individual wellness foundations so you can manage these stresses more effectively. What are the symptoms of high stress versus low stress? What are the symptoms of stress? You've got physical, emotional, and behavioral. So physical stress, you can have, for high stress, headaches, muscle tension, digestive issues. If you're having a low stress state, you could be energetic, you could be eating normally, sleeping well. Emotional symptoms of stress: high stress, anxiety, anger, irritability, sadness. Where if you're in a low stress state, you might be really chill. You have the sense of well-being, you can self-regulate. And what about behavioral? Substance in high stress, one might be tempted to gravitate towards substance abuse or withdrawal or changes in eating habits, eating too much, eating too little. Where in low stress situations, normal social interactions, healthy eating, and staying focused. So in order to understand stress a little bit better, what we're going to do is talk about the limbic system, because you really need to understand the limbic system to understand stressors and how we developed as humans. So let's talk about a stressor, okay? the first thing that happens is the stressor is received by an organ in the brain called the thalamus, or section of the brain called the thalamus, okay? That's the relay station for sensory information. It goes to multiple places so that the sensory information comes in and immediately goes down to the amygdala. This is one of the most primitive parts of the brain, okay? And it's especially associated with managing fear and anxiety. It's an old section of the brain, okay? It kept us safe. When we were being chased by saber-toothed tigers, this guy kept us safe, okay? It basically says, okay, this is not a good situation to be in. We need to get the heck out of town. After it goes to the amygdala, it goes to, assume that there is a stressor present, so it goes to the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus, in addition to other functions, it is the first part of the HPA axis, which we're going to talk about here in a second. Then we go to the hippocampus, and that information is processed by the hippocampus, and that's where there's memory access. So what your brain is doing right now, it's taking that stressor and it's comparing it to all of your stored memories, right? And then when you're comparing it to your stored memories, you will start to realize, in addition to contribution from the prefrontal cortex, which is the executive function of the brain, you're going to be processing whether this is a real stressor or just a perceived stressor. Am I really in danger, or am I just stressing out over something that's really unnecessary? And that's the critical part in terms of stress management. How are we processing our stressors? How is the mind interpreting these stressors? So here's the HPA axis that I talked about. That stands for hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So you've got a stressor that comes in, right? And it's processed. And then what happens is, where's the cursor? Oh, there it is. So the stressor comes in, and the hypothalamus produces CRH, or corticotropin releasing hormone, that acts on the pituitary, and the pituitary produces adrenocorticotropin hormone, which goes to the adrenal glands and produces norepinephrine and cortisol, okay? Your stress hormones. But we're just going to talk about mostly cortisol right now. In a normal response, cortisol is produced, and eventually what happens is the cortisol gets produced to a level where it starts to function as a negative feedback loop. So when you get enough cortisol enough cortisol produced, it acts to basically go back to the hypothalamus and says, okay, we don't need any more, we're good. That's a normal stress response. Imagine the chronic stressed state. That feedback loop is dulled, it's stunted. Parts of the brain get used to the cortisol feedback. So what happens instead is you get high levels of cortisol in your bloodstream all the time, okay? And what happens in high levels of cortisol is you get a variety of different effects. You get physical effects, emotional effects, and metabolic effects. Physical effects include weight gain, weakness, high blood pressure. Emotional include fatigue, irritability, memory loss, and you're also at risk for metabolic conditions like an increased risk of developing diabetes and sleep issue. Even one's libido can be affected through high levels of stress. So how does chronic stress affect us emotionally? Because remember, we're talking about emotional wellness here, right? Well, number one, there's an increased risk of depression and anxiety through this HPA axis. You're getting elevated levels of cortisol. Well, what do these elevated levels of cortisol do? They disrupt normal levels of serotonin and dopamine, okay, which are typically, you need to have these normal concentrations to feel normal. So Dr. Sumphin, if I'm, if I'm going off track, please. Very intimidating to have a psychiatrist. Number two, neuroinflammation. So you're getting these inflammatory cytokines, which are destructive chemicals that are crossing the blood-brain barrier. And neurogenesis are basically new neuron development in the hippocampus, which is that area where you have access to your memories, right? Memory control is reduced. So therefore, as you can imagine, if you're not really able to compare to what's normal, then that stressor is going to be perceived to be greater than what you might think, right? And then you get another shot. The poor hippocampus gets basically beat up again because cortisol actually shrinks it. So as you can imagine, stress levels can get elevated. Impaired emotional regulation. Remember our old friend the amygdala? Well, it becomes hyperactive. So you get exaggerated emotional responses to perceived threats. The poor prefrontal cortex, or the executive brain, will start to weaken. And as a result, branching in the prefrontal cortex or new neuron development starts to drop. And then you get that decline in, our wonderful word for this lecture, neuroplasticity, right? BDNF, which is something we talked about at the last lecture, and that was something that was actually produced in exercise. We're trying to bring them all together here. Is actually going to be limited. And that's also necessary for neuroplasticity, or for plasticity and emotional regulation. And then next thing for chronic stress, how does it affect us emotionally, is reduced resilience, right? And reduced coping ability. So when you're chronically stressed, there's a lot of wear and tear on the body and the brain. That's called allostatic load. You get what's called a flattened diurnal cortisol curve. So this is a normal, the black curve is a normal cortisol curve. That's what happens. So you're sleeping, and then you wake up, and then your cortisol levels start to go up, and then over the day, your cortisol levels start to slowly go down until it's bedtime, and the whole cycle repeats itself. For that poor chronically stressed person, remember, because of that HPA axis being blunted, what you're getting is the chronic stress curve flattening. So it's not dropping down, it's flattening. So as a result, you're getting all sorts of issues because of high stress, so high cortisol. One of them is sleep. Right? We all know how lousy we feel when we're chronically sleep deprived. So your melatonin gets suppressed, REM is altered, you get fatigue and irritability again. How do we fix this? Emotional wellness practice is what we're going to come back to time and time and time again, right? I mean, of course, we're all talking about prevention of burnout and in the big picture and system issues and individual issues. Here, we primarily talk about what we can do to help ourselves. And this is one big part of it, focusing on mindfulness and meditation, yoga and breath work, seeing professionals, getting therapy, counseling, or coaching. Physical activity, which we talked about extensively last month, expressive writing, and then addressing other wellness foundations. Because remember, like we said, if one foundation is affected negatively, all of them are affected negatively. But if you affect one foundation positively, you're affecting all the other foundations positively too. So just simply, how do these activities lower the stress response? Well, for your amygdala, which is responsible for emotion and fear processing, the amygdala actually gets smaller. What happens to the hippocampus? The hippocampus increases. You get more gray matter density. What happens in the HPA axis? Cortisol levels go down. What happens in the prefrontal cortex? You get increased connectivity and more regulation. You get reduced emotional impulsivity. This is all demonstrated in the medical literature. So if you're so inclined, we have the references at the end of the lecture. This has all been demonstrated through functional MRIs. This is neuroplasticity in action. Very, very cool stuff. And this is something we can do ourselves by embracing these things. So I just wanted to kind of finish up here by talking about emotional wellness in actions, giving you 3 examples. Number 1, a cancer patient practicing optimism, gratitude, and positive affirmations. That patient will experience fewer symptoms of depression and improved pain tolerance. Why? because that cognitive reframing is going to activate reward centers in the prefrontal cortex and also help with release of dopamine and serotonin levels. Number 2, a nurse attends weekly yoga classes. She's going to report, or he's going to report, improved sleep, reduced anxiety, and improved resilience. Why? Because that yoga is activating the parasympathetic system and down-regulating the HPA axis. It also increases GABA transmitter levels, which also helps to reduce anxiety. Number 3, a physician practicing mindful meditation for 10 minutes once a day is experiencing improved emotional regulation and less reactivity to stress. Why? Because this activity of mindfulness is increasing gray matter density, which is helping emotional regulation and prefrontal cortex connectivity. So all of those functions are increased. And of course, the amygdala activity is decreased. So the anxiety and fear and emotion processing, responsiveness is decreasing as well. So a couple of slides ago, we talked about the mind, right? So here is a stressed mind, the amygdala and primitive functions, the primitive brain in control. And this is the unstressed mind. This is the relaxed mind. You kind of see who's in charge here and who you want to be in charge here. When the primitive brain is in control, weaker control of thoughts, emotions, and actions. It's affecting your brain and it's affecting your body. It's affecting, obviously, all those around you as well. With the unstressed brain, the prefrontal cortex is in control, so therefore you have tight control of your thoughts, your emotions, and your actions. So just to touch on my point one more time, your mind is in control, and you can control your thoughts. And your mind can hurt you, or your mind can help you heal. And with that,
All right, guys. I am going to take you on a little bit of a journey. So we're going to try to pull these pieces together and talk about spirituality. Spirituality can be a little bit abstract, so I want you to hang in there with me. All right. So, have you ever been in a room with a patient or a loved one as they passed on? There's a moment when the mind seems to stop working. Their eyes no longer open. They're no longer engaged in thoughtful conversation. Then the body, the breath becomes labored, slow, and heavy. The monitor may show an erratic heart rate, slowing to asystole. It's that time in medicine when we declare a time of death. But if you stayed in the room just a little while longer, just a few minutes, a change happens. You notice a very subtle change. The room seems a little colder. The energy in the room is different. The life that once showed on that patient, even in death, is now gone. Some would argue that's the spirit. That's the spirit that has now left the body. I too will argue that the spirit, though abstract, does indeed exist, and it has a very important place in the triad of the mind, the body, and the spirit. It is the very essence of our human existence. And the spiritual component we deal with a lot in healthcare, but we often ignore it. I'd argue it's just as important as the mind and the body. So we're going to look at this in another way, just a little bit different. So there's the egg, the incredible edible egg. We have the shell, we have the white part, and we have the yolk, right? It is one complete whole egg. We don't think of these separate parts as disconnected from one another, but rather one piece of this whole egg. One cannot exist without the other. Each its unique, own, specialized part. But if one fails, the whole thing fails. I'll ask you to think about that in the same framework as you do with the human body. All three parts, one whole system. We've discussed extensively about the mind and the body. We've spoken in detail about that symbiotic relationship, one affecting the other. How what we think about, we bring about. We've talked about epigenetics. We'll continue to explore neuroplasticity and neurosyncrasy. One piece of the whole triad. And we understand the triad throughout the millennia of human existence through Christianity, Hinduism, most of your major religions. We have a triad, right? And we know that without this triad, we couldn't exist. It's just another way to think about it. So as we move through the rest of the lecture, that's why I want you to envision what we're talking about and what the spirit is. So there's lots of theories on spirituality. Aristotle believed that it was the highest point of all human existence and good was the activity of the soul or the spirit in accord with virtue. Maslow's theory of self-actualization, that's once all those basic needs are met, when you get to the very top, you only get there through this evaluation of the environment around you and being in complete awe of what that environment is. Erickson thought that your love for humanity and your greatest appreciation of what happens outside of you was that ultimate ego expression. So what does it look like? Poor spiritual health, how does that manifest in us? It's things like anxiety and depression, like we've already spoken about multiple times throughout today's lecture. Physical and emotional burnout. It's paranoia or irrational thinking as you keep going through that HPA axis, like we talked about, and you're growing that amygdala. Everything comes at you as if you're in this stressed panic state. Isolation, destructive behaviors, and acute on chronic illness. You just keep adding insult to injury. On the other hand, positive spiritual health manifests as a sense of purpose and meaning in life. There often is a religious or spiritual connection. Most of this is community driven. There's a big component of community interaction and being with other people that feed the spirit. Manifests as an inner peace and a contentment, a reduction in those reactionary destructive behaviors to improved health behaviors, a desire to do those improved health behaviors. Overall improved health outcomes and longevity of physical and cognitive functions. Neuroplasticity. We're going to talk about that again. We are rewiring that automatic response to decrease the stimuli that's sent to the amygdala, to deactivate that nervous system response that is sending you into fight or flight. We're doing that by being mindful. We meditate. We find quiet time in prayer, community engagement again. We have a reduction in stress and depression, again, those destructive behaviors, empathy and compassion. That's something, again, we'll talk about a little later in the slides, but empathy and compassion for yourself and for everyone around you. Increased longevity in life and overall cognitive function. So what's it look like? Remember that Maslow's top of the peak? Here's what it is. If you guys have never seen Hauser play his cello in concert, you've got to YouTube it. His deep passion that you just get lost in watching him get lost in the music. That's the tip of the pyramid, right? Each one of these is an example of how you get to that perfect spiritual well-being. Dr. Wayne Dyer is a motivational speaker and author, and he stated that you cannot be lonely if the person you are alone with, you love. You're on top of that mountain, sitting and meditating, but you are comfortable with the person you are sitting with, you'll have a better outcome through your meditation. And if you don't like the person you're sitting with, then meditate on why. Begin to see yourself as a spirit with a body rather than a body with a spirit. Change the way you look at things around you, and the things that you're looking at will change. You can see things in a positive light, or you can see things in a negative light. Research suggests that engagement in some sort of religious or spiritual activity will lower the states of anxiety, depression, and substance abuse dramatically. The key piece to that is the community connection. Spiritual health was found to be one of the main determinants of improvements in mental and physical health in patients. Excuse me. And patients with a positive spiritual outlook had improved anxiety, depression, and stress throughout their entire hospital stays. So why is this important to us? As healthcare professionals, burnout and compassion fatigue are estimated to accumulate in about 500,000 nurses short by 2030. That's only like 4.5 years from now. And that's a lot of short nurses. So organizations that focus on whole persons, the mind, the body, and the spirit, have improved job satisfaction. They have improved employee retention. And more than that, they have improved direct patient care. Because when you're in a good place, you can give that to other people. That directly affected not only the quality of patient care, but the actual and perceived quality of care that the patient thought that they were getting. It's a really big deal. Neurosyncrasy. We are creating a hard stop to that chaotic firing that's happening across the brain when we have that sympathetic fight or flight response. We are forcing a coordinated firing throughout all regions of the brain. And why is this important? Again, because what you think about, you bring about. And if you are rapid firing in a chaotic way, you are not able to think rationally. So one way to do this is guided meditation, utilizing all 5 senses. Why? Because it forces you to use all the regions of your brain to fire in synchrony at the same time. You're going to improve your entire visceral response. All the things that we've already talked about also improve, but that full body visceral response. So, you guys ready to do it with me? All right, so let's get comfortable. We're going to pretend that we are in this park. We're walking down the path. It's an early spring day. The day is young. There's a heavy spring dew that lingers in the air. You sit down on this bench. Take a couple of deep breaths. Get comfortable. Start to connect to the bench. Feel the warmth of the wooden planks. Gently warming your back and your legs. Breathe in, breathe out. Feel the sun warm on your skin, the warmth encompassing you like your favorite blanket. Take a deep breath in through your nose. Smell the spring blooms, fresh, gently fragrant on the air. The smell of cut grass in the distance. Breathe in, breathe out. Feel a gust of cool, moist air gently whispering across your face. You can almost taste the heavy dew in the air. It feels like spring. You hear a rustle through the trees. Bird flutters from branch to branch. You see a busy squirrel darting from one corner of the park to another. Breathe in, breathe out. Close your eyes. Take a deep cleansing breath in. There's a soft, gentle, warm glow radiating through your eyelids as the morning sun grows in strength and warmth. A warmth that reaches all the way to your toes. Breathe in the cool air. Breathe out. There's a branch that snaps. Reconnect with the bench, with time, and with place. Open your eyes. Breathe in and breathe out. You are calm. You are refreshed. Your mind and your body and your spirit are in perfect synchrony. There's a spiritual component to each and every one of us. The goal is to remember that you cannot be a whole person without that triad. The body, the mind, and the spirit. And your spirit is your light and your energy. Each one of us unique and individual. And it is beautiful, my friends. And so my challenge to you as you go forward on your wellness journey is to stay connected with that spirit and share it with everyone you know, because it is you at your finest. And with that, I will turn it back over.
Best talk I've ever heard. Well, that kind of caps our talk today. I went long-winded and ate up more time than we needed, but any questions, thoughts?